Good evening, dear friends, and welcome back. Welcome to a night unlike any other. Tonight we gather together in the quiet hours when the world outside grows still and the shadows inside grow long to do something that has captivated human hearts since the very beginning of time. We are going to tell ghost stories. Not the kind you half laugh at around a campfire, not the kind you brush off before the morning light comes flooding back in. No, tonight we are talking about the real kind. The kind that happened to real people in real homes on perfectly ordinary days that suddenly became anything but ordinary. This is day 2 of Ghost Week, and I have to tell you, what we have gathered for you tonight is something truly special. Tonight, we are going inside haunted houses, not abandoned mansions on faraway hills, not crumbling estates from another century. We are talking about regular homes, apartments in busy Indian cities, childhood bedrooms in suburban neighborhoods. Rental houses where families ate breakfast and watched television and thought they knew exactly what kind of world they lived in, until something reminded them, very clearly, that they did not. These are stories told by ordinary, skeptical, clear-headed people who spent years trying to find a logical explanation and simply could not. These are stories about blood that appeared from nowhere, about figures that ducked behind staircase railings, about footsteps in empty hallways, about the moment a grown woman reached for her husband's hand in the dark and felt something that was not his hand at all. So wherever you are right now, whether you are tucked into bed with the lamp on or curled up on the sofa with a warm cup of tea in your hands, I want you to get truly comfortable. Pull that blanket just a little tighter. Because tonight, we are going to let the darkness take control, and by the end of this, I promise you, you will be looking at your own home just a little differently than you did before. And if you are new here and this is your first time joining us, welcome. We are so glad you found us. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so that you never miss a single story. Our community here is warm, wonderful, and loves a good spine-tingling tale just as much as you do. You are going to want to stay. Now let us begin. Our first story comes from someone who wants to share something that happened to their parents approximately 30 years ago. The storyteller describes themselves as a devoted fan of paranormal accounts, someone who genuinely loves the process of analyzing these stories, turning them over in their mind, searching every angle for a rational answer. And yet this particular story, this one from their own family, has never yielded a single satisfying explanation. What makes it even more striking is that both of their parents are self-described skeptics. These are not people who are easily swayed by superstition or atmosphere, and every single person they have ever shared this story with has walked away equally stumped. So our storyteller offers it to us tonight, quietly hopeful that perhaps someone out there has experienced something similar, or perhaps carries some reasonable explanation they have not yet considered. The year was 1995. Our storyteller's parents had relocated to the beautiful, bustling city of Bangalore, India, for approximately 1 year. The move was driven by a work contract their father had secured, and it was always understood to be temporary, a comfortable, finite chapter of their lives rather than a permanent change. When the company offered them a duplex apartment to rent for the duration of the contract, they accepted without hesitation. And truly, life in that apartment was, by any measure, genuinely lovely. Along with the apartment came the perks that accompanied upper-middle-class living in India at that time: a couple of household maids who handled the cleaning, took care of the grocery shopping, and managed most of the cooking. For a young couple who were barely past the newlywed stage and as yet had no children, it felt like an almost dreamy existence. Every practical concern was handled. Every daily chore was taken care of. They were free simply to enjoy being together, to enjoy the city, to enjoy life. Their mother was not working at the time, so while the father went off to the office each day, she remained at home. On their floor of the building, there lived one other resident, an older woman in the neighboring apartment. Their mother would greet her politely whenever their paths crossed, but from very early on, something about the older woman's gaze made her feel faintly uncomfortable. There was something in the way the woman looked at her, not hostile exactly, but watchful, assessing, as though she were quietly carrying knowledge that she was not quite ready to share. Then on one of their third or fourth encounters, the older woman paused and asked her a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Living in that flat?" Their mother likely nodded, perhaps a little unsure how to respond. And then the woman asked something stranger still. "Do you not sense anything?" It was a confusing question, and the older woman offered no clarification, no follow-up, no explanation for what she might have meant. She simply left those words hanging in the air between them. As time passed, the woman's behavior evolved. Whenever she saw their mother in the hallway or at the building entrance, she began advising her not to stay in the apartment by herself. It was gently said, but it was said consistently. Their mother, understandably, began to wonder if perhaps the older woman was simply experiencing some confusion or heightened anxiety that came with age. She did not push the matter. She filed it away and carried on with her pleasant, comfortable daily life. And then came the morning that neither of her parents would ever forget for the rest of their lives. It was a perfectly normal day. The sun was out. The weather was pleasant and cool. The time was around 8 in the morning, and the household was going about its ordinary early-day routine. One of the maids had just finished mopping the floor. It was freshly cleaned, still slightly damp, gleaming in the morning light. Their mother and their paternal grandmother, who was visiting the family briefly at the time, were together in the kitchen. Their father, meanwhile, was in the living room, settled comfortably into one of the two armchairs that were positioned facing each other with a small table between them. On that table sat the landline telephone. To the left of the seating area, a pair of large sliding doors opened out onto a generous balcony. Their father had the morning newspaper open in his hands, doing what so many husbands do on a relaxed morning, reading quietly while the rest of the house moved around him. Then the telephone rang. Their mother stepped out from the kitchen and answered it. The voice on the other end belonged to a relative calling with news, sad news, though not entirely unexpected. Their maternal great-grandmother had passed away. She had been over 90 years old and had died peacefully of natural causes. But their mother had been extremely close to her, and no matter how anticipated a loss might be, the moment you actually hear those words, the grief hits you fresh and real. She was quite upset. After a moment, she handed the receiver across to her husband so that he could also speak with whoever had called. He reached out his arm to take the phone. And then, a single large drop of something fell to the floor. It was red, dark red. It looked, they would later describe, exactly like blood. The kind of blood you might see if someone had opened a vein. It struck the freshly mopped floor, and then, before either of them could process what they were seeing, another drop fell. And then another. And another. A trail of drops, each one smaller than the last, moved across the floor in a line, moving past where their father sat, skipping around his feet entirely, traveling toward the sliding balcony doors, and then stopping. They stared at each other. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then they both looked at the ceiling. No water stains, no leak, no sign of anything dripping from above. They checked themselves. Neither one had a single cut or scratch anywhere on their bodies. The maid who had just cleaned the floor was still in the apartment. When she realized what was on the floor, she refused to go anywhere near it. She would not approach it. She would not clean it up. And so it simply stayed there. Over the following hours, the blood dried. It turned brownish and powdery, the way old blood does when it has been exposed to air for too long. And eventually, because what else can you do when life continues demanding your attention, they had to set the incident aside. Their mother, shaken and thoughtful, quietly took the old neighbor's advice to heart. Rather than spending her afternoons alone in the apartment, she began visiting a nearby library in the afternoons. Her husband would stop by the library on his way home from work, and they would return to the apartment together each evening. Life resumed its rhythm. Months went by. The incident sat in the back of their minds, but was no longer at the front. And then came their last night in that apartment. The following morning, they would catch an early flight. Their time in Bangalore was over, their contract complete. They were in their bedroom, doing what one does on the last night in a home, packing, organizing, sorting through the accumulated details of a year's worth of life into bags and suitcases for the journey ahead. Their mother accidentally dropped something onto the floor. She bent down to retrieve it. And it happened again. One large drop, then smaller drops following in a trail, moving across the floor, skipping past her hand where it hovered near the ground. This time, they were genuinely frightened, badly enough that they seriously considered spending the remaining few hours before their flight in a hotel rather than staying in those rooms. They left Bangalore the next morning carrying no explanation, none at all. Now, the story does not end there. Shortly after their departure, a new young couple moved into the apartment. This couple happened to be friends of our storyteller's parents, also contracted by the same company, and they were, if anything, even more committed skeptics than their parents had been. When their parents shared what had happened, the new couple essentially dismissed it entirely. They were not interested. They were not concerned. They moved in unbothered. One night, the wife woke up in the small hours, thirsty. She padded downstairs to the kitchen, poured herself some water, and then began making her way back up the staircase. With each step she climbed, a drop of blood fell next to her foot, then another, and another. The drops accompanied each footfall, one after the next, all the way up the stairs. The terror of it was so sudden, so overwhelming, that the woman suffered an epileptic seizure right there on the staircase and fell. The sound woke her husband, who came running and helped her carefully back to bed. She was all right, ultimately. Shaken and frightened, but physically she recovered. Her husband, however, woke up the next morning having constructed a different narrative entirely in his mind. He was convinced that some kind of elaborate practical joke had been played on his wife. He found the blood from the night before, now dried on the stairs, and carefully scraped it up using a stiff piece of cardboard. He placed it in a small bottle. He intended to have it tested in a laboratory on his way to work. He tucked the bottle deep inside the zipped pocket of his office bag. He stepped out of the building. He flagged down a rickshaw, the small motorized taxis common on Indian city streets, and climbed in. The instant he sat down, the driver somehow lost complete control of the vehicle. The auto rickshaw spun a full 360 degrees and flung the husband and his bag out into the road. The driver walked away without a scratch. The husband broke his arm, and the small bottle containing the scraped blood was never found, not in his bag, not on the road, not anywhere, despite being sealed inside a zipped pocket. Our storyteller closes this account by telling us that the apartment still exists today. Their family has driven past it many times over the years during visits to Bangalore. Their parents pointed out. The stories are told and retold, and each time the same questions return without answers. What was the presence in that apartment? What did the old woman on that floor actually know? What were the warnings she kept trying to give, and why did she give them? Our storyteller suspects they will never know. And so it joins the long, mysterious pile of things that have no explanation, only the lingering weight of having happened. If you are here with us for the first time tonight, we want to say welcome, truly. Hit that subscribe button below and join our community. We share stories just like this one regularly, and you will absolutely not want to miss what comes next. Our next story comes to us from someone who grew up in a house where something was clearly wrong, and where, crucially, they were not the only one who could see it. Before our storyteller was even born, their mother had her own disturbing experiences in that house, particularly centered around the bedroom she slept in at the time. She would wake in the early hours of the morning, around 4 a.m., that thin and restless hour when the night feels most like itself, with her heart pounding far too fast, racing in her chest without cause. And there in the room around her she would see them. Shadow figures, dark shapes with the rough suggestion of human form, moving through the dimness of the bedroom, sometimes approaching the bed where she lay. But she also noticed something consistent in these encounters, a pattern that she never forgot. A white circular light would appear, and whenever it showed up, the shadow figures would vanish. She never worked out what that light was or where it came from, but it came reliably, and reliably it made the shadows disappear. There was one night, though, that was different from all the others. On that particular night, she made the deliberate decision to keep her eyes tightly shut. She knew that if she opened them, she would see something in the room. She had learned this about the darkness in that house. So instead of looking, she simply reached out her hand in the direction of her husband. He is a tall man with large hands. This is something she knew well, something as familiar to her as her own face in a mirror. She reached out expecting to feel those familiar large hands. What she felt instead was a hand that was small, the hand of a child. At that time, there were no children anywhere in the house. Not visiting, not nearby, no children at all. She says, interestingly, that the presence behind that small hand did not frighten her. She squeezed it gently, and it squeezed back once softly and then let go. Not long after this, her parents moved their bedroom to a different room in the house, and for a while the experiences stopped. They started again when our storyteller was around 10 years old. By then, they were old enough to observe things with clarity and to distinguish between a dream and something that was genuinely, physically happening. Their mother had described some of her encounters in enough detail that the child had considered sleep paralysis as a possible explanation, that altered state between sleeping and waking where the mind plays tricks that feel absolutely real. But what the storyteller began witnessing themselves did not fit that category. These were not things that happened while they were half asleep. These were things that happened in full, clear waking light. Objects would fall from shelves and tables, not in the way something falls when it has been carelessly placed too near the edge and gravity does the rest. We all know that kind of accident, the slow, inevitable tip followed by a soft landing. This was different. Objects that were positioned securely, nowhere near the edge of any surface, would suddenly fly as though they had been thrown. Toys, books, things that had been sitting perfectly stable would abruptly launch off with force, landing feet away from where they had been. Sometimes our storytellers saw it happen in real time. Other times, they only heard the crash from another room and came in to find something on the floor with no explanation for how it got there. There was one incident involving their cousin Patty that stuck in the memory with particular vividness. Their parents had gone out to run errands, leaving the two of them to return home ahead. Patty went up the stairs first. Our storyteller followed a moment behind, and in that moment they clearly saw, or believed they saw, Patty walking directly into the kitchen and heading toward the refrigerator. It was a perfectly ordinary observation of a perfectly ordinary action. A person moving through a familiar space toward a familiar object. Except that when they stepped into the kitchen a moment later, there was no one there. Patty was in the bathroom. She had gone there from the front door, not to the kitchen at all. Whatever our storyteller had seen walk toward the refrigerator had not been Patty. But the experience that stayed with them most deeply of all, the one that truly lodged itself in the foundation of memory, happened on the day of their 11th birthday. The party was over. Their mother had left for a work dinner. Their school friends had all gone home around 6 in the evening. But the day was not quite ready to end. There were still candies out, leftover snacks, the general festive air of a birthday afternoon not yet fully dispersed. And so our storyteller and four cousins, Liz, Fiorella, Sandra, and Patty, decided to continue the celebration in their own private way. They would throw a birthday party for the dolls. The room they chose was the same one that had historically been the center of their mother's experiences, the room where the toys lived, where the computer sat. Liz was around 18 at the time, slightly too old and too cool to fully invest in the doll party, so she settled into the chair at the computer desk. The younger girls set two dolls in a chair at the far end of the room. One was an ordinary doll. The other was large, roughly 75 centimeters tall, a substantial physical presence even in a room full of children. They invented a game. They danced when the music played, and when the music stopped, they froze like statues. Liz controlled the music from the computer. They played like this happily for about half an hour, laughing and spinning and freezing and laughing again. And then, at some point that none of them could predict or prepare for, all five of them turned their heads toward the dolls at exactly the same moment. The large doll moved. It did not wobble. It did not slowly tip sideways. It was grabbed, seized by something invisible, and thrown violently to the floor. The movement was abrupt and forceful and unmistakably deliberate. All five of them saw it happen. Simultaneously. And then all five of them screamed and ran, stumbling over each other to get out of that room as fast as their legs would carry them. After that, something shifted in the feeling of the house. The atmosphere, particularly in certain rooms, could become dark and heavy in a way that pressed down on you without any physical cause, oppressive, difficult, as though the air itself had changed its quality. Our storyteller's family is Catholic, and they responded with faith. A priest was called to bless the house. A mass was arranged for the souls in purgatory. And on the very same day, right before the blessing was performed, our storyteller was in the room with Liz playing PlayStation together, when both of them watched a video game manual slide across a table on its own, moving without anyone having touched it. After the blessing and after the mass, the incidents began to fade, slowly at first and then more completely. Cabinets, the faded floral wallpaper still clings to the walls, its corners peeling away from decades of slow, patient time. The whole place carries the feel of a moment preserved beyond its natural lifespan, a time capsule that never quite unlocked itself to let in the present day. As a child, lying in bed in the evenings, our storyteller became intimately familiar with one very particular sound. The bedroom floor was covered in thick plush carpet, the kind of carpet that was fashionable and luxurious in that decade. And that carpet had a very specific sound when anyone walked on it. A soft, muffled crunching, something like the sound of footsteps pressing into fresh snow. Our storyteller learned the sound the way you learn any sound that comes to you every night. They heard it beginning somewhere across the room. They heard it growing closer with each step. They felt the faint vibrations through the floorboards as the steps progressed. About dinner, he answered her. He turned to grab plates, and then the realization hit him: his daughter was not home. She had not been home for hours. When she confirmed later that she had been with friends at the time, nowhere near the house, the sighting had no explanation at all. When our storyteller reached their teenage years, they went through the phase that many teenagers go through, the desire for privacy, for independence, for a space that felt uniquely theirs. They lobbied for the basement bedroom. It seemed perfect, cool, removed, a private corner of the house away from everyone else. In retrospect, they describe it as a significant mistake. Every night from overhead came the footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate, the sound of someone pacing the main floor of the house, moving back and forth between the kitchen and the living room. Anyone who slept over heard them too. Guests would sit up in the dark and say, "Do you hear?" But visits home still brought the familiar oddities with them. At Christmas, sleeping in the guest room, they woke to the sound of footsteps circling the bed, step, pause, step, before fading toward the door. Their mother admitted over the morning coffee that she had been hearing the pacing again lately, always after dark. Their father makes jokes about it now, calls it the ghost of the 1970s, personally offended by the avocado green stove that the house still contains. But our storyteller says they sleep with one eye open during visits, and they find themselves wondering, in a way that is equal parts unsettling and oddly tender, whether the house simply misses having them as an audience. Our next story comes from a 17-year-old who has lived for 5 years in a rental house with a notably troubled history. Before it was renovated and made available for tenants, the house had fallen into serious disrepair. It had, at one point. Its head toward our storyteller, nodded once, a single, slow, deliberate acknowledgement, and murmured something in a low voice that could not be understood. Our storyteller inexplicably rose and followed it down the hallway. At the end of the hall, they found nothing. The space was entirely empty. The encounters became more frequent as the years passed, and particularly so after our storyteller entered high school. 2 incidents stand out above all others in their recollection. The first happened at approximately 4:30 in the morning when every member of the household was asleep in their beds. Our storyteller was jolted awake by a tremendous crash from the kitchen, just beyond their bedroom door. They rushed out and found the sturdy metal dish rack, which normally sat anchored in its proper place near the sink, had been relocated. Not knocked over, not shifted a few inches. It had been moved a full 5 feet from where it. Texture of life in that house. Dishes would shift several inches across a counter surface without any proximity of human hands. Silhouettes would appear in doorways at the corner of the eye and dissolve before they could be directly observed. And always, there was the sensation of being watched, a prickling awareness at the back of the neck, like unseen eyes tracking every movement through every room. Virtually every friend who ever crossed the threshold of that house described it independently, without prompting. A tension in the air, a heaviness, an unmistakable sense of scrutiny that followed them from the cluttered garage to the living room couch to every corner of the space. Our storyteller mentions something that happened on a family beach vacation that reinforced these experiences further. A strange occurrence in a hotel room that confirmed, for them, that whatever forces they were dealing with were not limited to the walls of that house alone. But the aspect of all of this that is perhaps most intimate and most difficult to explain is the physical contact. Unlike their friends, who primarily reported visual or auditory experiences, our storyteller's most frequent and personal interactions with whatever presences lived in that house came through touch. They might be folding laundry in the back room, or sitting on the porch, or hunched over homework at the kitchen table, and then feel it, a cold, distinct pressure on their shoulder. Or along the side of their face, not violent, not threatening, strangely, almost comfortingly familiar, like the quiet, steady touch of a familiar hand simply reminding you that it is there. These touches were usually gentle, a soft rub, a light tap that faded quickly, but they could escalate. When sitting at the desk or lying in bed, the sensation would sometimes shift into something heavier and more enveloping, a pressure against the torso or chest, as though something were pressing close from behind in the manner of a tight hug, or leaning its full weight against them from above. At its most intense, lying alone in bed late at night beneath those childhood glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling, our storyteller would feel the full, definite impression of something substantial pressing down on top of them entirely, a pinning weight that resisted all their attempts to push upward against it. They are clear that this is not sleep paralysis. They can always move their fingers and toes, always confirm that their body is fully under their own control. They can summon all their physical strength and push, and manage perhaps 2 or 3 inches of resistance before the invisible force presses them back down to the mattress with a force that rattles the entire bed frame. They lie there, wide-eyed in the dark, until the weight eventually lifts of its own accord several tense minutes later. What our storyteller has observed, and what they find genuinely troubling even amid all this, is a clear pattern of behavioral difference. Toward them personally, whatever lives in that house seems to extend a kind of restrained tolerance, even something that might be interpreted as a rough form of affection. But toward anyone else, family member or friend, it shifts into agitation, aggression, loud banging on their sister's bedroom door precisely at midnight. The deliberate scattering of their father's tools across the garage workbench when the house is completely empty. The flung ice tray. The consistent reports from visiting friends of an atmosphere so tense and watchful that the entire social circle has taken to calling it, half jokingly and half sincerely, the haunted house. Our storyteller wonders, as they close, why them? Why this particular tolerance? Why this favoritism that feels less like affection and more like possession? And they want to know if anyone out there has experienced something similar. Like this video if this story touched something in you, and share it with someone you trust. You never know who in your life might be quietly carrying a similar experience. Our next story is one that its teller has never shared publicly before. They have thought about sharing it for at least 10 years. The memories keep surfacing, and this is the first time they have finally decided to set them down in words for others to hear. So we receive this account with the care that it deserves. Our storyteller was about 15 years old when the events they are about to describe began. They were home alone one afternoon, responsible for looking after their family's husky named Athena. As the hours passed, they began hearing sounds coming from various areas of the house. Subtle at first, the kind of creaks that an older wooden building makes as it settles and shifts. But these sounds sharpened, focused, took on the distinct character of deliberate footsteps moving across the floorboards downstairs. This would have been unremarkable in a house that was occupied, but every door was locked from the inside, and no family member had been present for hours. Wanting to test whether any of this was real or simply the product of an anxious imagination, our storyteller gently woke Athena from where she was napping on the living room rug. The dog's reaction was immediate and deeply unsettling. She rose to her paws unsteadily, her ears flattened against her skull. She began pacing in tight, anxious circles, a low whine building in her throat, her whole large body tense and braced as though she had located something invisible circling just beyond their line of sight. Our storyteller called their best friend Sarah. "I'm scared," they told her. "It sounds exactly like someone has broken into the house and is walking around downstairs." They were simultaneously caught between the rational voice that insisted they were overreacting and the undeniable reality of what the dog's behavior was telling them. Sarah was at home looking after her younger sister Emily, who was around 9 years old. Getting to the house would require bringing Emily along. Despite the complication, our storyteller pleaded with her. Within minutes, Sarah and Emily were at the front door. The three of them armed themselves with sharp kitchen knives. They swept the basement together, flashlights cutting across dusty storage bins and corners, but found nothing that could account for the sounds. Moving upstairs, the footsteps had transformed into something quieter and more insidious, overhead whispering, as though whatever was up there had grown cautious of their approach. A wave of nausea moved through our storyteller without warning or cause. Sarah went first into the parents' bedroom, checking behind the dresser, under the bed, inside the walk-in closet. Nothing. She came back out into the hallway. And then all three doors on that upper landing, our storyteller's bedroom, their brother's bedroom, and the washroom, slammed shut simultaneously. Not one after another, all three at the same instant, with a force that sent the sound crashing through the walls like a series of explosions. The air in the hallway was completely still. Not a draft, not a breeze, not the slightest movement of air anywhere in that enclosed space. The three of them leaped off the floor from pure shock, their screams locked voiceless in their throats. They recovered and they continued. The washroom held only the soft echo of a dripping faucet. Their bedroom was empty. Their brother's room was empty too, except for the usual contents: sports trophies on shelves gathering dust, clothes hanging in the closet. And in the ceiling of that room there was an attic access hatch with a pull-down ladder. They tested it. It refused to move, stuck firmly in place. They recorded Snapchat videos as evidence while probing the mechanism with a wire hanger, managing to shift it perhaps 1 centimeter before it locked back. They moved to the attic access in the parents' room and found it equally immovable, as if sealed from the inside. Eventually, the adrenaline ebbed. Sarah and Emily went home. Our storyteller stayed, shaken but physically unharmed. Approximately a year later, their father was away on a military deployment, and the house was quieter than usual in his absence. Their brother had come over for the evening with his girlfriend. Our storyteller was on a late-night Skype call with their friend Jake when the familiar prickling awareness returned, the sensation of being watched, of something present just beyond the edge of visibility. The two dogs in the room, Steele, the large 130-pound German shepherd who normally radiated easy confidence, and Athena were both cowering. Steele had his tail clamped tight between his legs. Athena was trying to press herself behind his bulk. Both were trembling. Our storyteller tried to nudge the dogs out into the hallway toward their mother's room, where her door was kept open on nights her husband was away so the dogs could roam and protect the house. The dogs refused to move. They braced all four legs against the floor and would not budge. When they finally, reluctantly padded out of the room, what happened next came instantly, the sound of boots thundering up the staircase at full speed, heavy and fast, as though something massive had been waiting at the bottom and had now lunged upward with purpose. Our storyteller slammed the bedroom door and locked it and pressed their ear against the wood. The footsteps stopped at the top landing, then shifted slow and deliberate now and moved directly toward the bedroom door. They stopped just outside. 20 minutes passed, or what felt like 20 minutes, though shock compresses and stretches time in ways that make it unreliable. And then one retreating step, and then silence. Our storyteller told Jake they needed to sleep and ended the call. The next morning, they overheard their mother on the phone with their father. She was telling him that she had heard sounds like an intruder in the house during the night, and that at one point, she had felt the mattress beside her dip under the weight of something sitting down on the edge of the bed. When she turned to look, no one was there. Later that day, alone in the house, our storyteller made a methodical inspection of every room. Everything in the parents' room was untouched. They moved to their brother's room. Their heart pounded as they looked around, trophies, clothing, everything as it should be. And then they looked up. The attic access hatch in the ceiling was gone. Not hidden, not covered over with a piece of furniture. Gone. In its place was a smooth, seamless expanse of drywall with no seams, no cord, no pull-down mechanism, and no evidence whatsoever that anything had ever been installed there at all. Our storyteller called Sarah immediately. She responded with disbelief. "No way. That can't be happening again." Together, they gathered every person who had been present during the incident the year before, Sarah, Emily, their brother, their mother, all of whom clearly remembered the attic hatch from that earlier night. Their father, when confronted with this account, responded with emphatic denial. He insisted that no attic had ever existed in that room. He accused everyone of fabricating or misremembering. Determined to produce evidence, our storyteller asked Sarah to send the Snapchat videos they had recorded during that first incident, the footage of them using the wire hanger on the mechanism. Every single video refused to load. None of them have ever loaded since. Over time, their father wore down their mother's memory through repetition until she aligned with his version of events. The attic simply never existed, he maintained. It was never there. Our storyteller offers this detail. When the family was moving into the house and choosing bedrooms, they had gone first. They walked into what would become their brother's room, saw the attic hatch in the ceiling, and immediately said no. Not that room. They did not want an attic hatch hanging above their bed while they slept. They chose the other room instead. To this day, more than a decade later, that ceiling in their brother's room is smooth and unbroken. No hatch, no evidence, only the memories of several people and videos that will never play. Our storyteller, on a lighter note, has long pursued ghost hunting as a serious hobby, using professional equipment, EVP recorders, spirit boxes, EMF meters, and has captured what they believe to be genuine voices and energy anomalies within the house over the years. One recurring entity, they call Dave, apparently primarily resides in the bedroom closet. And Dave once caused a significant amount of domestic trouble during a sleepover when a plush toy launched itself across the entire length of the room and struck the far wall with a resonating thud, bringing their mother storming in to demand silence. They say that incident was actually the catalyst for acquiring their ghost hunting equipment in earnest. Whether you believe every layer of this account or only part of it, our storyteller assures us it happened exactly as described. What do you think about all of this? Has anything in these stories reminded you of something you yourself have experienced? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments. We genuinely read every single one, and this community is one of the most thoughtful and warm places on the internet for exactly these kinds of conversations. Our next story takes us somewhere quite different, into the professional world of a medical examiner. Someone whose daily work involves spending time with the dead in ways that most people never encounter. Most of the stories they have shared in the past have come from their years working in the morgue. But lately, they say, whatever has attached itself to that part of their life has begun following them home. Everything escalated significantly when they and their husband moved into their first house, situated right next to the storyteller's old high school. They would be completely alone in the house and hear their husband's voice calling to them from another room, clear and distinct, unmistakably his voice, except that he was not home. This happened more than once. They also began noticing something at the edge of their peripheral vision, the back of a person's shoes and legs, the suggestion of someone standing just behind them. Every time they turned to look, no one was there. Their husband, meanwhile, was having his own version of the experience. He would hear his wife's voice in the house, speaking to him, even when she was not present and had not been speaking. He is mildly schizophrenic, and hearing things is not an entirely new experience for him, but the frequency of these episodes increased in a way that stood out even by his own measure. 2, 3 times a day, he would hear her voice. There was history beneath that land. The ground the house had been built on had once been a burial ground, and the official documentation stated that the remains had been properly relocated according to the religious traditions of those who had run the cemetery. On paper, everything had been handled correctly. In life, it did not feel correct at all. The storyteller's health began to deteriorate. They had recently had their gallbladder removed, but the pain they were experiencing felt like ongoing gallbladder attacks, cramping pain, nausea, an inability to eat or drink properly, and severely disrupted sleep. On top of all of this, their emotional state had shifted in ways that felt alien to their normal self. They were angry. They were sad. Not in the way of ordinary mood variation, but in the deeper, heavier way of something that did not belong to them pressing its weight down on their personality from the outside. It got bad enough that their husband intervened and suggested leaving, just for a few days, a short trip to visit family, a change of air. They went. The change was immediate and dramatic. Away from the house, our storyteller slept for 12 consecutive hours. It was the most deeply peaceful, uninterrupted sleep they had experienced in as long as they could remember. The following morning, they felt genuinely well for the first time in months, lighter, clearer, as though a fog had simply lifted. Their husband noticed it too. And he realized, sitting quietly with this observation, that he had not heard his wife's voice once during the entire time they had been away. Not once. At home, he heard it 2 or 3 times daily. Away, it was completely silent. They returned home on a Tuesday, having arranged for someone with religious expertise to come and help cleanse the property. They were genuinely hopeful. Instead, the activity worsened. Whatever was present in that house seemed to respond to the cleansing attempt not by retreating but by escalating. Around this same time, their husband was approached by one of the largest technology companies in the world about a career opportunity. They took it as a sign. They moved. Our storyteller waited until they were fully settled in their new home before writing any of this down to share. They decided not to sell the old house. Neither of them could bring themselves to pass that situation along to another unsuspecting family. For now, the house stands empty, waiting for some form of real resolution. They have a new morgue now, new colleagues, and these colleagues have already begun sharing their own observations and experiences. Nothing about that aspect of the work, it seems, has changed. Stories follow them wherever they go, and they will keep us updated. Our next short account comes from someone staying at the Intercontinental Hotel on St. Charles Avenue, recently checked out from a room on the 6th floor, and desperately wanting to know if anyone else has ever had a strange experience in that building. The evening had begun normally. They and their wife returned to the room after dinner The hallway was completely empty. No footsteps retreating, no cartwheels, no staff member, no person at all. Just the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. Later in the morning, the elevators failed entirely. Someone on their floor had apparently been trapped inside one and had been screaming for help until staff arrived to pry it open. Our storyteller took the emergency stairwell down to the lobby, and on the way encountered a staff member who looked pale and wide-eyed in a way that had nothing to do with ordinary tiredness or irritation. In the lobby, The front desk staff answered every question with smooth, deflecting vagueness. Electrical glitches. Technical issues, nothing to be concerned about. Our storyteller asks, has anyone else experienced something at that address on St. Charles? Our next brief account comes from someone whose sister came for a visit and was stopped cold the moment she stepped through the front door. She experience genuinely frightened her in a way that had never happened before. And she is not alone in having seen things in this house. The other people who live there have independently reported similar figures in doorways and hallways. Neighbors who have stopped by have mentioned it casually, assumed someone was upstairs, wondered why the house seemed empty. And yet our storyteller, who has lived there the longest of anyone, who knows every corner of the house better than any of them, has never once seen anything. Not a glimpse, not a shadow, not a movement at the edge of their vision. If the figures are real and the sheer consistency of independent reports from skeptical people makes it very difficult to dismiss them, why are they entirely invisible to the one person who spends the most time in the house? It is a question without a comfortable answer, and it is one our storyteller leaves with us tonight, open and unresolved, as so many of the best questions are. And don't forget, if any of these stories have given you chills tonight or sparked a memory of your own, we would genuinely love to hear from you. Like this video to let us know that you are here with us, share it with someone who loves a good story, and tell us in the comments which of tonight's accounts stayed with you most. Which one do you find yourself still thinking about? Write it down below. We read every word. And that, dear friends, is where we close for tonight. This has been day 2 of Ghost Week, and what a collection it has been. Tomorrow night, we return for something that many of us find even more chilling than ghosts. Tomorrow is Demon's Night. A personal favorite, and we promise you will not want to miss it. Make sure that notification bell is switched on so that you are there the moment it goes live. A very warm and sincere thank you to our members and patrons, whose names you can see on screen right now. Your continued support means the world to this channel and to everyone who is part of this community. If you would like to explore those extra perks for yourself, you will find the link waiting for you in the description below. Until tomorrow night, stay warm, stay curious, and stay just a little bit wonderfully unsettled. Sweet dreams, everyone. We will see you then.